Our world is trembling. It's coming apart at the seams. The social systems, the political systems, and most importantly of all, our ecological system is breaking down.
Is it a given that the human species goes extinct? No. Does it look like that's what's going to happen? Very, very, very likely. It's really hard to see that this does not end that way.
Millions of people are suffering right now. It's worse than we were told. We are now in danger.
I don't know where things are going. I can't predict that. But all the elders that I know of say we have a sacred obligation toward how we're going to be here at this moment.
I'm Michael Shaw, and this is my journey to explore what it would mean if I accepted this threat is real. It's only been in recent times that I've been willing to look clearly at the stark realities of ecosystem breakdown. CO2 emissions and temperature rise rightly get a lot of our attention, but pollution, biodiversity loss, and the destruction of our natural world is moving at a runaway pace. I've been facing up to a realisation that not only are we in the middle of the 6th mass extinction, but humans are very much on the list. Over the last few years, I've had the privilege of spending a lot of time with my friend Catherine Ingram. As a Dharma teacher for close to 30 years, she's always had a keen eye for the truth, and her online essay, Facing Extinction, had gone viral since we met. It was in her company that the magnitude of the situation fully landed in me.
Very, very few people are looking at it directly. And even those who sort of are seeing the evidence and seeing, kind of becoming a little concerned, they're still having a hard time going the full distance with it. Even people who, you'll read them or watch a movie that they've done and it'll go almost there, but then there's this holdout for some sort of hope or some kind of fantasy green technology that might save us, or on and on. We all have seen this who are talking about these matters in this way. It's almost like people staring at Magellan's ships and not really understanding, not even seeing them, right? That's the apocryphal story.
I realised that I needed to meet and talk to others who were also looking clearly at this. I wanted to try and find a place in myself to hold it, and I also wanted to see how others were choosing to live their lives in the face of it. In order to make this happen, I had to sell my house. I had no experience making docos, and I also recognised that the premise itself would be unpopular. All in all, it's a scary edge to be walking, but a purpose in these times felt like a type of life raft. The first person I wanted to meet and speak to was Dar Jamal, and that meant getting over to the States. Here we go. I was really compelled by Dar's story. With no journalistic experience, he had followed an inner call to travel to Iraq and report on the 2003 war. He emerged from that having published 3 books and having won the Martha Gellhorn Award, but it was his writing about the unfolding climate tragedy that's brought me here. His articles had won him the Izzy Award for Excellence in Journalism. He had also published a book, The End of Ice, a book which I often refer to as a climate classic and still like to keep close at hand.
Delighted to be talking to you today, Dar.
Great to be with you. Thank you.
Yeah. I think there is a thing when we talk about the loss of ice, and certainly in the Arctic, there is a thing where people are hearing this information, but it's a bit abstract in some ways. I know in your book you've said our fate is actually tied to what happens there. What does it mean for us, the melting Arctic?
Well, it is easy to, especially for most of us that don't live up in the Arctic or that don't live directly within eyesight of a glacier or that aren't directly reliant upon that for our immediate drinking water needs, for example. It's easy to kind of think, oh, well, it's far away and yeah, it'll be a tragic loss, but whatever, like life will go on. It won't. No, life won't go on if we lose ice at the rate that we're losing it now, and this continues into the future, which it is going to. For example, in the Arctic, there's so many different ways we can come at this, but the loss of the Arctic sea ice is overtly going to be one of the most catastrophic consequences of the crisis. So we're looking at right now, one scientist I interviewed for my book, Dr. Harold Wanless, said, we are looking at over 100 feet of sea level rise that right now is already baked into the system. So that means if we stopped all CO2 emissions on a dime and did all the mitigation efforts we can possibly dream of,
Which we're not
even starting, that even if we had, we're still looking at 100 feet of sea level rise at least. And there's several other scientific studies that show anywhere from that to, 60 feet to 130 feet. Just pick your poison. Point is, even if it's on the lower end of that, that means every coastal city on the planet is gone.
I had to admit that my resistance to hearing this perspective was disappearing fast, but there were still so many questions I had. When Jem Bendel's paper, Deep Adaptation, came out in 2018, it not only had a big impact on me, but it had also sparked a whole movement by that name. I went to the residential workshop he led with Katie Carr and met him for a private conversation.
The reason I'm here, what brings me here, is the paper that you wrote in July 18, Deep Adaptation. And you made a very strong statement in that about what you saw that was going on. And what did you see that was going on?
Yeah, so I concluded that climate change is much worse than what we've been told already, and that there were signs that it's now already has its own momentum. So these feedbacks, which will further heat the planet, they've already started, like the melting of the permafrost releasing methane, which warms the planet much faster than carbon dioxide, or forest fires, more frequent and more wide-ranging than ever before, also therefore producing more carbon. The soil's drying, producing more carbon. The ice sheets shrinking and therefore reflecting less light back to space and absorbing more into the oceans. So these are these self-reinforcing feedbacks, which it's quite obvious now that they're happening, and that means that climate change is speeding up. Our emissions are also speeding up. No matter what we've been doing, carbon dioxide emissions from humans has been going up since 1850 every year and at an increasing rate. So all this together, it was really scary. But the other side of it was then looking at what that would mean for our way of life. So often I'd read about this is going to be really bad for our children or grandchildren, or this is going to be really bad for particularly vulnerable communities in poor countries, perhaps living in hurricane zones or whatever. And then I actually realized that this was going to damage our own lives. When I say our own, I meant, me living in a Western person, middle-class life, that this is coming for me and people like me in my lifetime. So we're going to need to be much more public about that there's difficulty ahead. So the message has to become, millions of people are suffering right now. It's worse than we were told. We are now in danger. We must do all that we can to try and slow the problem down, but we must now also do all that we can to help each other through this. And it's that final bit which is not being said publicly yet.
In the other scientists' reports that I'd read, no one spoke like that. And it certainly got me thinking in entirely different ways, outside of the science and outside of the CO2 and the melting ice and into, how's this going to be in my life? But I also know you had a really hard time publishing that. It wasn't simple for you. Could you Just talk about what process you went through to get that out there.
So I wrote it, but I felt that I couldn't do it unless I fully expressed the truth as I saw it. So I wasn't surprised when the anonymous reviewers, that's the process for peer review, came back and they said, there's lots of good things in here, but it's not appropriate for a number of reasons. And one of the reasons was that you should not be concluding that it's too late to stop catastrophic climate change. And also that's going to be quite troubling for the readers. And the request to change it, to make it suitable for publication, would have stripped it of the emotion and also my own conclusion, which is that this isn't in doubt now. The only way one can say it's in doubt is if one chooses to stick to certain sort of paradigm of knowledge that, we can never be exactly certain about anything in the future. But I realize that gives you some kind of psychological, emotional escape. Say, oh, well, this might not be the case. Oh, we can't be absolutely certain. And that kind of helps you calm down. And I thought, well, that's not my truth. I mean, to me, this is certain now. And it opens up a whole new set of questions once you decide that it's certain that climate is going to really ruin our way of life. I'm encouraging us to think about what it might mean for local government and national government to start to get ready.
I could also feel this growing urgency to get ready for the days ahead, both practically and emotionally. But in order to do so as a world community, we have to start accepting the science and acting as if it's real. Yet in doing just that, it seems to come with this label of being a doomer.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, years ago, if I heard what's called the doomer view, I would think, but we must try and stop that happening. For me, hearing a doomer view would be impetus to try and cut carbon emissions and draw down carbon emissions and be more bold and ambitious and innovative in how we might do that. So I understand people who are allergic to hearing the view that it's too late to stop a disastrous amount of climate change and how that's going to make our societies fall apart. But I think they're wrong for a whole range of reasons. The first one is that people do not need a fairy tale future, a story of a fairy tale future in order to be motivated. We've seen that with the explosion of Extinction Rebellion around the world. Extinction Rebellion, the founders, and so I know them and I've been involved since the start, they're very clear that we are in a dreadful, perilous situation and we must do all that we can to give ourselves a better chance. So, yeah, I think the argument that this is somehow going to lead to apathy, despair or depression and not engagement on the agenda to cut carbon or draw down carbon, I think is just wrong. And there's also environmental psychology published to show that's wrong as well. It's that if somebody feels that climate change is now and it's close to home, they're way more likely to do something about it than if it's somewhere in the future affecting somewhere else, somewhere hot and poorer than where they're living.
It's too late to change this system. We have to be brave enough to admit to ourselves that we have to have a different kind of conversation about what to do next, even if it feels like we have no idea what that means. We have to be brave enough to start that conversation.
This felt true to me. We have to be brave enough to start these conversations, because if we don't, how are we even going to start to get ready? It does seem, however, like more and more people are willing to at least begin having it.
Yes, it's very scary, and it brings up a lot of despair and a lot of feelings of hopelessness. So is it not our job as adults to process through that, understand that, and now then ask some of the deeper, harder questions of, okay, so now what am I really going to do? And how then shall we live? And how are we going to be during this time?
I was lucky enough while away to spend some time with Native American elder Stan Rushworth. He's someone whose people had survived genocide and had personally suffered the lifelong emotional and physical impacts of being a Vietnam-era vet in the Far East. So I could think of no one better to talk to about how to approach living in these times.
My grandpa was born Cherokee man in 1894. My mother gave me to him. So I was 5 years old, and she said to him, which she told me when I was almost 40, she said, our way of life is in danger of dying. I want you to raise this child so it doesn't die. All right? So I am Cherokee by upbringing. I'm also an enrolled citizen of the Chiricahua Apache Nation. Not something I sought, but by invitation. And that's not something you would ever even think of saying no to. It's not either something that you would ever seek.
Yes.
It's a gift and a really, really deep honor. So then I went to an alien high school, and I was taught that Native people are in the past tense. You know, my friend Greg here was taught that his whole family was extinct. Okay? Literally, that's what he was told in his classes as a child. Your people are extinct. I'm right here. So I came up in that, and I became very difficult to deal with, I think, because I didn't believe that, and yet somehow those beliefs were imposed on me. So in a sense, I kind of forgot my grandfather's teachings in my own sadness and in my own grief. Perhaps that same grief that many people are waking up to now as they feel the future, their future being catastrophic. So my present was catastrophic, okay?
And you come out now as a holder of this wisdom that we're hearing in this documentary. How have you come through that personally to be who you are now?
Barely. But that sadness and that grief and how to live with that, maybe even transform that, that's what people need to learn from Indigenous.
I guess the question that people might be asking when they're watching this is, okay, I'm speaking to a native elder. What could the traditional owners of the land say about climate change?
Well, I'll tackle one part of it first.
Right.
And that is to answer what could they say by telling you that they have been saying, this is all going to come back on all of us. And they've been saying it since day one. If you go back, this is part of the problem with people. People are listening to Native people now because their world is in danger, okay? They're saying this is the end of life as we know it, so on and so forth. This is something that Native people have been dealing with ever since the colonists came. And I see too much people going leapfrogging over the genocide, you know, and saying, well, we want this ancient wisdom, but they really don't know what the ancient wisdom is, because that has to do with a relationship to the land, to the universe, to community that is really alien. You know, it's really alien. And our struggle as Native people today, because we're so influenced by colonial culture, that it's hard for us to inhabit that. And we need our ceremonies to inhabit that pre-contact experience. I'm kind of putting this back to the panic right now that is being formed around climate change, which is a future orientation rather than seeing the present orientation. and the past. How has this happened? Okay? You cannot fix a machine. You can't put something back together like a motor or something that you've taken apart unless you really look and see how you took it apart.
And just how did we create this situation? It wasn't just the Native Americans that had been through this. Western culture has been built on it. Best economic practice and protecting our way of life has meant doing whatever we need to whoever or whatever we need to keep this party going. It's so hard to look at this. I am part of this culture and have benefited from the profits of this past and still live in the privilege of its actions and its relentless procession.
Guilt is simply a human emotion. And for me, when I see a newcomer or a colonial person feeling guilt for what their forefathers did, I think it's a good sign, okay? Because it shows a sense of cultural collectiveness that goes across time and space, which is reality, okay? The whole notion of linear time and saying, okay, we can stop something here and say, well, this is no longer relevant to where we go in the future or to where we are right now. That's an arbitrary thing. It's not reality. It's a fantasy, okay? Time and space are intimately interconnected, not just, all my relations and, I'm you and you are me. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about something really, really vast. So I think it's good to begin to tie into that. And of course, when you see all this destruction, the first thought is, oh my God, what happened here? Well, you have to answer that. You have to go in and say, well, what created this? What is this type of thinking?
There is certainly something, I think, that I carry around looking at the destruction of the earth and the natural systems. And part of me goes to this part of not liking myself as a human or some disgust with humanity that we might have done this.
Well, there are different thoughts about that. Some people say that, we were born in, the native thought is we were born into the garden, so to speak. We were born into heaven. You guys were kicked out of heaven. Right?
Yeah,
that's
right.
the myth. Okay, so
Yes.
That's the story. So if you're kind of living with that story your whole life, of course you're going to be in self-loathing. Okay, because your creator kicked you out of the garden.
Kicked out of the garden
for misbehaving, right? And didn't really show you how to behave. That's the part where the guilt comes in, I think, and looking at how things have been taken apart. And those kind of myths, I think, are part of what needs to be examined on a really fundamental level. That things that make us fallen by nature, ideologies that make us fallen by nature, that make us bad, that make us, extra planetary aliens that don't know how to live here. Astrophysics says, no, we do know how to live here now. We've just forgotten it. Okay. So part of that is coming back into believing in ourselves as human beings. It's not human beings that have made things colossally dire. It's a particular type of thinking. It's a predatory type of thinking. Jack Forbes calls it the wetiko, which means cannibal. Because that predatory psychology is completely justified as being the natural state of man. Mm-hmm. And that's where the guilt comes from, because it's not true. Mm-hmm. And everybody knows in the deepest part of their heart that we're way better than that. Mm-hmm. That answer your
Yeah, thank you,
question?
Stan. That's just so beautiful.
we have a huge range within us, right? We have a range that will, like I say in the piece, there is so much mercy in some of us that we will give our own life for perfect strangers, right? It's amazing what the human range of consciousness is, from true depravity and utter just cruelty and thrill killing to this extraordinary level of sacrifice and kindness and love, right? And we all kind of know the range within ourselves. So you see it, if you step back and widen the lens big enough, you start to see it as an evolutionary projection, and that we've landed exactly where we were headed, right? This is what we did here, and this is now the consequences, and we will pay that price.
Between Catherine and Stan, I couldn't help thinking that collectively the darker side of our natures had dominated and led us down this path. Stan went on to relay an old story that warned of these times.
The story is that people were living on the moon, and there came about a difference in thinking. And one of the thinkings, as he put it, was that the moon was a gift, just like the earth is a gift, and it's to be treated as a gift, to be cared for, taken care of. The other thinkings that developed was that it was there for the use of humans in whatever way their whims decided that they could take. And so they got into what Daryl called exploitation of the resources. And these two peoples got into a big battle about that, and they invented weapons to go against each other for these two opposing thinkings that ended up blowing off the atmosphere of the moon, and all the people died off. So they essentially, that war of the thinkings essentially destroyed their ability to live there.
This story was many hundreds of years old, but it did seem like it was describing our current day situation right down to the letter.
We have an economic and political system which is structuring for stupidity. It's insane that UN Secretary General gave a speech where he said climate disruption is happening now and everywhere, and no one reported it. This is not sort of some wacko scientist or marginal journalist or something. This is the UN Secretary General saying climate disruption is happening now and everywhere.
See, I didn't even read that.
Yeah. So
the mainstream press is not reporting those type of stories, essentially.
Well, yeah, that's one thing, but also the press is the idea that the idea of news, like, that's just that sort of our sense of the way the world is just comes through news. Well, of course it doesn't. Corporations are the biggest storytellers in our lives. The price of a product is a story. The very nature of money is a story. The society we live in, where banks decide who gets the loans, that's all in the realm of story. The way we dress and the way we're told we need to buy this or that, this is all stories. All those stories are based on the hydrocarbon civilization, cheap oil and not caring about the atmosphere. So when I talk about collapse, it's as much a collapse of all that worldview, all that structure. So the money system, the advertising system, the fact that we need to consume stuff in order to have jobs, in order to pay bills. The whole market capitalist system, that's what's going to fall apart. And some people would say it should fall apart to help. I don't know if that's better. I just think that's just speculation, whether it's better to have a collapse of industrial consumer society now or not. I think there'll be a hell of a lot of suffering in any rapid change. So rather than making predictions, I just say that we we need to recognize how deep it goes, the predicament. How do we get into this predicament? We need to look and inquire deeply and make sure we don't repeat the same problems in our responses to this situation.
I couldn't help but think about the young people growing up in this. How do we hold them as they face what's coming? How do we even start to have a real conversation with them about this? Dar was telling me about his way and about a conversation he had had with his 16-year-old nephew.
He already essentially knew the punchline, that we are in it deep and that his future will look nothing like mine when I was that age. And he completely understands that. And so my job then is, how can I support you? And not like I'm going to support you and then you're going to do your thing, but like, okay, I'm here and you come back whenever you want. And when you need a break, I'm at your service. I'm at your service. And, you know, I'm a tool, I'm a resource. Use me, call me anytime you want. Because how much energy are we going to spend talking to younger generations or each other, pretending like things aren't what they are? Let's just admit the truth and then behave accordingly, because we're still here and there's still immense amounts of work that need to be done. And we are absolutely morally obliged to try to save as much as we can and mitigate and buy ourselves time. And, you know, boiling it all the way down, I got to a point when I was actually in a 3-month writer's residency when I was working on kind of my book outline and I was writing my introduction to the book and I was trying to find the voice of the book. And I had all this data together, which was a culmination of years and years of reporting and research. And I was completely overwhelmed. I mean, I looked at it in total and it was like, it's over. Why even write the book? We're off the cliff. It's like, why do anything? And a good friend of mine, Nick Terry, out in this small town where I was at the time, is a Zen meditation practitioner and teacher. And he had a class every Tuesday that I would go to and sit. And he'd come over sometimes for coffee. And he came over when I was in that kind of despair. And I said, Nick, why even write the book? And he says, you know, Dar, if there's one tiny organism in the Amazon that gets to live one more week because you write your book, then it's worth it.
We've got to be okay in the uncertainty and the emotional difficulty. We've got to be okay ourselves and with each other. That's okay. That's normal to be confused and to feel pain in this context, and learn how to hold each other in that. And in that calmer way, then start to explore, so what do we do? Or what do we stop doing? Because I realized a lot of people would just want quick solutions, like, oh no, okay, what do we do? Where do we run? Who do we blame? Who do we fight? Is that kind of reaction. And so I wanted to help create something that invites a different way of being. And one Outback pilot, she told me, yeah, you're talking about extending the glide.
I love this analogy.
And
go on, yeah.
And she said, well, yeah, like if your engine cuts out, you've got problems. Your first thing to do is extend the glide, because you're two things. You know, you might suddenly gives you time to maybe kickstart the engines or solve whatever technical problem you've got, or you're also trying to look for a safer place to land. And then maybe the third thing is to give yourself time to, if you can't call home and say goodbye, just process your life and say thank you, have some gratitude for the experience of your life.
I could definitely feel in Jem someone who is choosing to live in these times in a much more awake and open-hearted way. On one hand, I felt this rising reverence and appreciation for life. Yet on the other, a painful, deep ache of facing up to a lot of death and loss.
But what comes for me is just mountains of sadness.
Yes.
And, you know, that's something personally that I've been wading through and continue to wade through. Very difficult to relate to the world in the same way.
Yes.
I know in my own journey across the life, I've I've done a lot of work not giving in to that sadness, working with it in some ways where I wasn't going to be a depressing person, in inverted commas. But this feels like another level again.
That's exactly right. I think anyone who understands the circumstances that we're in has to feel sadness. If you're a human and you're not a sociopath, you're going to have to feel sadness. And I feel that the time that we're in the great dying, right? It comes with sadness. Now, does that mean that we can't feel joy? No. Or that we can't feel love? I mean, I love the Jonathan Franzen quote, even in a world of dying, there are new loves being born, that you keep finding in your day, tiny little things that are beautiful. And even if you may have a sense that they will not last, I mean, nothing does last, you know. It's often been described, this understanding, as similar to being in hospice, but still with relatively healthy bodies. If one happens to still have a healthy body, in a way you can have the benefits of hospice, which is often people report intense feelings of love. Priorities get more straight. You don't sweat the small stuff. You're not obsessed about legacy and your name continuing and all those kinds of things that are often ego-based. There are, and I know we've spoken about it before, there are ways in which you feel more awake and alive and even free, certainly psychologically free in a lot of ways. And it comes with sadness. You pay a price for it. It comes with sadness for sure. And I don't see any way around it. I, as someone who shares Dharma sessions with people, I've looked also for those kinds of perspectives, and I cannot honestly offer any that alleviate the sadness. I can't bear any kind of transcendent talk that is rife in the spiritual scenes. It's just another form of denial and some sort of crazy bargaining that doesn't work. It's rough. It's like Van Morrison said, rough God goes riding. This is a rough ride, and we're watching a lot of very sad things, you know, very sad circumstances, and yet I feel so tender for everyone.
Five days ago today, I lost my best friend to cancer. And I got to sit with him, you know, and he did everything he could to fight, and had a big surgery. And then, you know, things started to go south shortly thereafter, and they had him on a breathing mask. And we knew we had extremely limited amount of time with him, you know, like days, if not hours. And, you know, we knew he was going to die. He knew he was going to die. And me and his partner and he's quadriplegic, so he had a personal assistant. And we were all there, and we just loved him and talked to him and were with him all the way through it, you know. And it was one of the most amazing, magical times and powerful experiences I've ever had in my life. And, you know, what I just, you know, once I knew, okay, my best friend Dwayne's on the way out, like, do I stop loving him? Do I stop caring for him? Do I stop showing up and doing what I can? No, I mean, the opposite. I'm going to show up and be as absolutely present as I can. And that's what I did. And I feel like that's where we are on the planet right now. Like, is it a given that the human species goes extinct? No. Does it look like that's what's going to happen? Very, very, very likely. It's really hard to see that this does not end that way, but we don't know for sure. And so I don't add the "but we don't know for sure" part to give false hope. I add it just because I think we have to have enough humility to say we're this tiny little speck of life on Earth, and we've never been here before. We don't know what's going to happen. We know things are going to get extremely hard and bad And I think it's a given that billions and billions of people are going to die. Does that mean all the species goes? Who knows? But it means here we are in this moment where we can still love the earth, we can still love each other, and we can still take care of each other, and the earth is best we can. And I think it just brings all of that into focus right now.
You know, we have to come back into a deeper allowance and belief in the human spirit. And we have to, you know, this prayer that I gave when you guys came, Mimuische means we are your children, and speaking to the great wonder, and which is inclusive of the mother earth, and we are her children, you know. So to pretend that we're not her children is to be really messed up in a certain way in our thinking, right? So people say, oh, well, the earth would be better off without us humans, we're defiled, so on and so forth. That's like saying that the mother will be better off without her child. That's just completely insane. You know, the mother loves her child. You know, no matter how messed up she might be because of whatever trauma, she loves her child still. And that's the relationship that we need to imbibe, really.
I got the message to do this book by being out in the mountains, you know, and this is why when I've given talks on my book and book readings, I try to leave people with the importance of listening, because dominant Western culture is doing anything but listening. And indigenous wisdom tells us it's all about listening. And so for me, when I was on Denali and got that message to go to Iraq, that wasn't from here. That came up into me while I was up on the mountain because I was listening. And then later, when I was in the mountains, I had this really deep, strong pull to do this book, The End of Ice. I had plans to do another book. I already had a contract to do another book about Iraq. And I literally had to completely change directions and say, no, that's not what's in me to do now. I need to do this book. And so that was from listening. And now I'm at a point now where the book came out in January, and I'm still giving some talks on the book, but I need to do some different writing now. And it's in conjunction, or it's along the lines of, we need to be really listening to the earth, and we need to be really listening to people who that is their culture and that's what they've always done. And so my writing's now taking me more in a direction of indigenous thinking and indigenous perspectives on what's happening. And I can say cursorily up front, the single most important thing is to listen. And I think, again, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but right now at this time, each one of us, if we go out and really listen as closely as we can, then I do believe that if we do that the right way, each one of us will get what's ours to do. And in that way, the earth is the organizer. You know, we're not going to have a political organizer. We're not going to have a famous journalist. We're not going to have some leader. No one's going to tell us what to do. All of the systems that brought us to this place are abject failures. Capitalism with a green leaf, which would be the Green New Deal, abject failures.
Even the green movement itself.
Right.
Yes.
It's failed. Let's admit it. And we're on our own. I mean, what government on the planet right now, even in the best case scenario, is coming anywhere close to reacting to this the way that it should be? No one's even starting to come close. So we're on our own. It's up to us, but we're still here. And so are we going to listen and behave appropriately now? Because if not now, when? Because we have a chance right now to go out and listen. And then I truly believe each one of us then get our marching orders, if you will, from the earth. And then the question is, are we going to do what we're told?
My first ceremony, as I perceive it now, with my grandfather was him taking me down to a pond in a ditch bank and sitting me down at probably age 6 and just telling me with his eyes to sit. And he sat next to me, and we sat for a long time until all this life came around us. this just incredibly beautiful life. And I was sitting there in my mind going, okay, what are we going to do? What's he going to teach me? Where are we going to go and stuff? And he's looking at me and he's going with his eyes, just sit. And so pretty soon the frogs come up and birds are all around us and everything. And then there's all these incredible dragonflies, like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dragonflies that are flying all around us with this different colors, the brilliant turquoise and really bright, intense crimson. And these are, some of them are really small damselflies and others are like 5 inches long. And pretty soon, and they're right in front of me. And pretty soon I'm realizing that a whole ton of them are copulating. And they're flying right up to me, with the male or the female looking into my eyes right here and the other one attached facing the other direction. And I'm 6, and all this life around me is having sex. They're procreating, and the energy was just over the top beautiful. And I couldn't think anymore. I could only be there, And I could only realize that I was completely immersed in, swallowed up, and part of this incredible thing that people call nature. And I was just like this. And then I got calm with it, and I looked at my grandfather, and he nodded, And I realized later, much later in my life, that was my first ceremony. Mm-hmm. Okay? That's what the Sweat Lodge does. That's what a lot of our ceremonies do. They bring you into the world in a way that teaches you how to be there in a humble way and in a way of recognizing the beauty. And that's the truth of it. That's the truth of it. That's why so many people say, this is the garden. This is heaven.
It was good to be home and to feel my feet back in the earth after so much travel and to land again with Michelle, my love. I'm really not a gardener, not yet anyway, but I felt I needed to start to learn. There was something about Stan's ceremony that had left me thinking, and I carried that story with me for a long time. Yes, it was his first ceremony as a boy, but it was speaking to me in my life now. There was no medicine, no drums, no sacred words. It was simply him slowing down enough and stopping to open his eyes to the vast beauty. Couldn't I do that too? How can I stay open to this beauty even as the changes arrive?
Well, we thought we had a slice of heaven, but it's not how it's worked out. Mainly due to coronavirus, and the people that we were renting from have had to come back from overseas. So in very short time, we have to leave the garden that we were just settling into.
Yeah.
We feel pretty disappointed.
Yeah, it's pretty devastating, not just for us, but for them also. Their whole travel plans have been, have ended, and there's a sick mum over there, and it's really hitting home. It's hitting home that things aren't going to be the same anymore, and to find security in this time is very challenging.
There's just no happy way to end a documentary like this. Since I started making it, I've been caught up in the fires in California and Australia. I've seen the outbreak of coronavirus, and I've watched the race protests in the States erupt. We can only expect more of this to come, as these are the days we're in. So the sudden loss of our rental seemed fitting for the times. Now it was time for us to find a new home, a place to drop deeper into ourselves, the land, and each other. I live in an extremely beautiful part of the world, and I'm grateful for that almost every day. But in the coming times, I can see little going as planned, from the basics of the way we live down to the age we expect to live to. It's so easy to collapse or lash out when we're threatened, and I'm no stranger to those reactions. But as Stan had said, we have a sacred obligation of how to be in these times. Learning how to do this in our communities and support systems will only be more and more important. It's also true that being in the unknown that all of this throws me into has given me the freedom to live more fully and focus more on the things that really matter. Time may, after all, be short. Learning how to be in these times is the only thing I can think of to focus on now. To quote Stan again, this is heaven, this is the garden, and I want to appreciate and love it all while it's still here and while I still can.
So what we now need is courage and acceptance. Courage because this is hard. It's hard for a tender heart to take this in, to live with this amount of sorrow. And acceptance, because the struggle against the truth of this is just another form of weariness. And in that acceptance, you find love. You find love for your own life. You find an incredible tenderness for the beings of time, the impermanent creatures that we are. You find a lightness, right? It's like Leonard Cohen said in one of his songs. So come, my friends, be not afraid. We are so lightly here. It is in love that we are made. In love we disappear.